so versed in this. So we'll call the meeting to order. Jennifer, if I could ask you to call roll, please.
Yep. Bo Brunsma. And just so everybody knows, everyone is muted, so you'll have to pull yourself off mute to hop on to do roll call. Dale Carpenter. Okay, I can see that Dale is on, so I'm going to mark him as a yes. Jennifer Kronk.
Here.
Patty Fleming.
Here.
Dylan.
Here.
Adam Gilbertson.
Here.
Shanda Hermanson.
Here.
Susie Hedlund. Mike McGinley. Senator Nolan.
Here. What you're saying?
Well,
Heather O'Hara. Quentin Queer. Sarah Schreiner.
here.
Terry Seekins Crow. David Smith.
Here.
Sarah Swanson. Amber Terry. Jim Wanacott.
Here.
And Jason Yeager.
Present.
And Mr. Chair.
Here.
Well, that just barely gives us a quorum today.
It looked like you were doing the math and it was going to be close. Okay, with that, Jennifer sent out a packet of information to all of you in advance of the meeting. Included the agenda and the minutes. First order of business is we get a motion to approve the agenda before us.
So moved.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
What does this
do?
Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. We've got an agenda. Moving into the next order of business is the minutes from our last meeting. And again, I would ask for a motion to put those minutes on the table.
I move for approval of the minutes.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Adam. Moved and second to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. The motion is passed. Moving into our next time slot is public comment. Do we have any public comment this morning? Okay. There'll be a second chance at the end of the meeting if there is any public comment. With that, we apologize for the delay. Thank you for sticking with us, but I would love to turn the meeting over to Superintendent of Corvallis, Pete Joseph. Pete, if you're on, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hey, really appreciate the opportunity here to speak to this board. Again, my name is Pete Joseph. I'm the superintendent at Corvallis. To my left is Jason Wirt. He's our executive director of our charter school. And to my right is Amy Lewis. She's one of our elected board of trustees that has been on the, I would say, the small part of our school board and really launching our charter schools. So her presence here today is not only as an elected official, but also just as somebody with a great knowledge base of how we've become so successful with our charter school. Hey, really quick, did everybody receive that information, or at least the PowerPoint to a certain extent?
That was sent out in advance with the meeting packet, so
Okay,
everyone has it.
perfect. I will take questions. Any of us will take questions at any point in time in regards to any questions you may have that I may not get to. I know time is short, and I'm going to try to be as concise as I can. My wife always tells me I get a little wordy, so but I'm going to try to get through. But if you have questions at any point in time, please interject. So I think it's always important, especially speaking to a group that's as important as this particular group, to explain our why, kind of why we're here, how we got here, and then I will go into the ask as far as what I think how we're connected here today. And I think it's pretty awesome that we're at this particular point. But the why of why we're here really dates back 3 years ago. This is before charter school, the public charter school bill of House Bill 549 was enacted. This goes back to actually, I believe, this board and a big piece of transformational learning in the Montana Ready project. With your guys' efforts in the state, OPI, Board of Public Education, to really try to engage students into the workforce due to the state of Montana having significant shortages in 5 sectors. So we have always had a thriving CTE program here at Corvallis. I mean, Jason Wirt, before he was the executive director of our charter school, was a principal at Corvallis, so he's got a ton of intellectual capital here. But we've always had a thriving CTE program. And when the state launched Montana Ready and some of these transformational learning grants, I, as a superintendent, kind of saw an opportunity. We were in $1 million deficit 3 years ago due to a lot, the Esser Cliff and some other mitigating factors. We have had at Corvallis, we've had a 100% graduation rate over the course of the last 8 years, which ranks nationally in the top 1%, even with charter schools. But we're only sending about 45% of our kids to college. Another mitigating factor for Corvallis in this marriage is we have a large homeschool population. Don't quote me on this, but I believe just within our school district, which is roughly about 6,500 voting members within our school district, within our boundaries, we have the highest homeschool population in the state. We have now open borders for education with House Bill 203 and some parent choice stuff as far as competing. We don't have all the bells and whistles that a lot of school districts around our area do. Hamilton and the Bitterroot Valley is a condensed geographic space. We have almost 7 school districts in a 40-mile radius and easy access to any of those schools. And then ultimately, how do as a superintendent, how do I best, take care of our kids and families in this environment of parent choice school movement? So then as the charter school movement started up, I took all of those factors and said, how can we create a public charter school that facilitates all of these needs and then intersect all of these needs, not only at the state level, but our local community. Hence, we came up with Rise Charter and Academies. We have 2 academies. We have a distance learning academy that allows for asynchronous online learning that provides our students either with full at home, hybrid in regards to like options within the school system of, partial enrollment at the school, partial enrollment at home, and then kind of a track 3 diploma route. Within those tracks, we also have a pathway academy that is all of the sectors that the state was needing for job placement. And because I'm only graduating 45% of our kids onto college, obviously there's a need in our community and obviously statewide. So the charter school's mission is to place these kids into these pathways. We're not tracking kids, they can jump in and out. But at the same time, with the asynchronous platforms, we have multiple tools that we are using to get kids graduation credit and ready for college if they so choose. But we can place kids into apprenticeships and internships and provide them the education that they need to graduate from Corvallis and be eligible for college if they so choose. And that asynchronous connection with the distance learning and all of the pathways that we're currently building is what's really special about our charter school. we're ready. We have 287 kids as of today that are in our K-12 charter school in this pathways. It's a K-12 program, which I'm 100%. I can't tell you how lucky we are from House Bill 549, the Board of Public Ed, to allow us this opportunity. We are absolutely taking kids in kindergarten and we are introducing awareness to every single one of these pathways that are job placements. And then as they move into 7th and 8th grade, we are doing youth science, which is all kinds of different things as far as like aptitude testing, where kids are at. And then as Jason starts to build in the high school internships and apprenticeships, we're either able to take a lot of our kids and continue to do what we do with a great legacy of excellence of education on campus. But here shortly, we're going to be able to place kids statewide in internships and apprenticeships, provide them their education as they intern in any one of these job placements. And then if these kids work out for these jobs, then we have immediate need to put them into jobs at the state level. And that's the beauty of what we're doing. And so when we provide this workforce, it's not only going to be necessarily from Corvallis. We can go statewide with this within our charter school and work with other school districts to do that. But we're absolutely going to be having kids coming out ready to go, knowing what they want to do, families on board. We're not going to be handing over kids that are just trying to figure this thing out. And so that's really what the program is. And we really need help at the state level. And obviously with this group. And when we get these kids ready, we can place them immediately. And these internships, we can build these internships together on a statewide scope. So that's kind of my spiel. The last thing that I want to say is, that there are two things that I think are relative here. I listened to the governor's speech, in Helena as he was speaking. He talked about having an idea and pushing an idea forward. I think what we're doing here is awesome because we have an idea and it's working. And yes, public education can be flexible enough to help the private sector. We can be flexible enough to help friends and families. And then I also think about Adam Grant's book, Think Again. And he talks about the paradigm shift between a BlackBerry and an iPhone. Well, public education in the state of Montana, here at Corvallis, I think we've made that jump from a BlackBerry to an iPhone. We just need partners. We need partners that see the vision, that see the idea. We can help kids and families and really push forward to the next level. So we're pretty excited here. Obviously, I'm really excited about what we've built. Our school board, our entire 5-year strategic plan is being rewritten in order to encompass this. We have full alignment in our community. And so we're pretty excited here. We just need some partners at the next level to put these kids to work. All right, I'm done.
That was fantastic. We've got some time for questions. I'd like to open it up for questions. Just to kick it off, Pete, I've got a few questions. They might be nested, but this is I love the innovation. And the first one's pretty simple. Are other school districts in the state doing what you're doing?
Well, I think that House Bill 549 and the public charter school movement, right? I think it just got off the ground this year. And I mean, there are other charter schools in the state that have different purposes and different missions. And yes, there are a few that I think may be following our lead or are kind of near what we're doing. I don't think anyone is as big as we are, has as many people in the pipeline, has as coordinated of an effort. I hope every single charter school in the state of Montana works. We're off and running. And I think what we're doing is pretty unique, especially with the two academies that are kind of intersecting. Nobody has the distance learning piece that we have along with the capacity within these pathways. I think that's pretty unique.
And I loved your analogy of BlackBerry to iPhone. I'm of the age where I've used both those devices, so I got it. But you said something earlier that would resonate, I think, with most school districts, that you're in $1 million deficit. Money is always the central issue, but the open enrollment, it prompted a thought that, it's that transition from devices that you referenced. Are you seeing financially the ability to use the open borders as a way to increase your A and B from the entire state? And is that part of the 280? The 280 that you've got in there, K through 12, are those all in Corvallis, or are some of those students coming from other parts of Montana?
Yeah, no, great questions. I'm going to start with the first one. I think with House Bill 203, which is open enrollment, it's creating school districts to either compete or fall apart. And I think that is 100% what we're about here. Right? I'm not going to be a victim. We have neighbors around us that have a $25 million commercial tax base that we don't exist. But Corvallis is single street. And that street hasn't changed since I went to school here. I'm going to date myself, 25, 30 years ago. And so for us, our ability to compete in this type of environment, the charter school encapsulating our community, keeping our kids, attracting other kids from other districts. This is how we're going to do it. We're not going to do it with, fancy facilities, and all of those other things that we have to compete with, but we're going to do it with excellent education and a charter school that is attracting kids. And I'll jump into that. Yes, we had 30 kids last year when we started kind of this pilot program before the actual charter school jumped in. Now we're at 286. And that is immense growth within our A and B. Absolutely. And all of those students that I shouldn't say that. 90% of those students are in our distance learning program. And most of them, I would say out of those 250 kids, let's just call it, most of them are within our school boundary. 95%. I'd say 95%. Yeah. And so we are also working with local school districts in our valley to give them the same type of support that we're doing, even though they don't have charter schools. But I do think we're unique within the Pathway Academy as far as being able to build capacity for a school to work. And Jason has been working his tail off already with these internships and apprenticeships. And frankly, we have about 5 or 6 kids right now that are seniors that we could assist in placing. But the magic's going to happen here in 2-3 years down the road with the support of the Board of Public Ed, Office of Public Instruction. I mean, I could see us having anywhere from 350 to 400 kids in 3 or 4 years that needed to be placed. And we're already working with other school districts to build programs similar to ours for other school districts. Because my goal here is not necessarily to take advantage of what is happening with open enrollment. My goal is to just provide kids and families an opportunity to succeed that they feel is best for their families. And I'm already working with Florence in regards to helping some of their kids, and working with Darby, Hamilton, trying to allow their kids the same access to what we've developed. And I think that's super important. But at the same time, the families want to choose to come here because we have a unique program, and we're doing the right things. Some of our students will be coming from out of district.
That's great. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to the rest of the board for questions. I feel like I don't want to dominate this. I could ask you questions for 3 hours, and unfortunately, we don't have that time this morning.
Good morning, you guys. My name is Sarah. I come from 2 parents that both graduated from Corvallis. Go Blue Devils. So I'm really excited to see what's coming out of this teeny tiny little school where I went to kindergarten. My question revolves around special education, and I'm curious about the students who need additional supports. How will this model be able to incorporate them into the program as well as mainstream students?
Yeah, great question. Our special ed, again, Corvallis, one of the unique things about Corvallis, we're one of only 2 schools in the Biddeford Valley that actually have a special services coordinator in our own special ed program. We are a full inclusive system, and we will continue to be. All of our students that are on campus, that are part of the charter school, will have access to anything that we can provide them, because that's just kind of the model that we've built. Some of our homeschool families, we don't have any of our special ed students that are track 1 or at home. So if families want special services and they have an IEP, they have to be at least track 2, which is mean partial enrollment on campus for those services, and we're providing those services for those kids. We also have a school to work program built into our special services that we are already placing kids into jobs that come through our program, which is pretty neat.
Hi there. I'm Chanda Hermanson, Director of Vocational Rehabilitation, and we do the pre-employment transition services. And I just want to recognize the work that your school is doing through those programs for the students with disabilities. It's one of our best partnerships in the state. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions for the Corvallis team?
Could I ask one very quickly?
Yeah.
Pete, could you talk a little bit more about the asynchronous delivery model? Are you partnering with school districts, the Montana Digital Academy, dual enrollment? Can you share a little how that's working?
Yeah, we have multiple tools that we're using here. Number one, we have had and will still continue to use Montana Digital Academy. I think it's an awesome program. However, a lot of our families and our homeschool families have a real affinity towards another group, Harmony EDU. Harmony is a state accredited online program as well. That was some of the work that we did last year with OPI. They are also working in every single school district other than ours. So Harmony is in, what we've done with Harmony is made sure that every school district has access to it. So Harmony facilitates a lot of our track one at-home kids. It's a full academic boat. They take attendance, held accountable for a lot of, just like a normal in-person kid would, full schedules. I think for the first time in a long time with Harmony, that online service provider takes care of those families. They have certified instructors, they have mentors, and our families are really happy with that product. We also are building asynchronous platforms with Grand Canyon University. And everyone always asks me why Grand Canyon. Well, I'll tell you why. They have the largest online learning base in the United States. They have over 100,000 online learners. They do an incredible job of building, I think, almost 50 graduate programs. They have a system called Halo, that they're asynchronous system for 100,000 online learners that, again, I think there's almost 50 degrees that people across the nation can get. They're building currently as we speak. They're building a Halo application for us here at Corvallis, and then that we can provide to other school districts down the road. That Halo, I need time to kind of explain that Halo online system is what the charter school, like the money that we're receiving, we're putting a lot of investment into that. So if you look at those 6 pathways that we have, right, we are taking units and projects that kids would experience that are similar to what they'd experience in the real world. We are giving that curriculum to Grand Canyon. So say it's construction. Grand Canyon's taking that curriculum, building a year-long asynchronous class, right? And then they're aligning it to state Montana standards with assessments. So if a kid ends up, and you saw on my PowerPoint that classroom without walls concept, we have a ranch very close to us, Skyline Ranch. They run about 500 head of cattle. We're developing 8 or 9 units on that ranch that Grand Canyon's going to take and package into a curriculum for state standards and assessments. So if I have kids on that ranch 5 days a week and they miss their face-to-face algebra class, or they miss their face-to-face biology class, it's packaged into that Halo platform. And then those kids, when they have time, either back at campus or at home, they sit down and they do the work. But the beautiful thing about this, and again, the concept of transformational learning, experience-based, competency-based education, is intimate student relationships to the curriculum, right? So these kids are doing animal husbandry on this ranch. Grand Canyon was taking that particular project and they're building math, science, history, English standards into it. But the kids ultimately are doing the work not only on the ranch, but then they're turning around and the work that they're doing for school is intimate with what they're experiencing as they're doing the work. And we are close to doing that. The other one is that salute to service. We're about ready to build basically for police, fire, forest service, military. We're about ready to build a military academy online with all of the things that these students may need. Grand Canyon, again, is going to package it into curriculum standards and assessments. And then those kids can do more apprenticeships and more time where they want to be, and then come back around and take on that stuff that Grand Canyon is going to put together. Now, I'm going to tell you this right now, Jennifer, and I see Susie's on there too. We are still building that. We have construction built. We have a stream to steam kind of built. Our medical's pretty much close to it. It's probably going to take us a year or two in every single one of these pathways to build that asynchronous platform. In the meantime, we'll be using Montana Digital Academy, Harmony, Ingenuity, Admentum to provide students, the classes they need if they happen to miss a class here on campus. I know that's a big explanation, but I think it's important for this group to understand that we're ready to put kids into internships and apprenticeships statewide and then place them into jobs now. And I think that's kind of why, we're having this conversation today. So yeah, that's the short answer.
Fantastic. I think we've got time for one more question if anyone has one.
Paul, if you wouldn't mind. Yeah. Hi, Adam Gilbertson, Senior Vice President for Field Technology and Innovation from RDO Equipment Company. We're actually your local John Deere dealer in Corvallis. We've been partnered with the Montana contractors for a number of years in Build Montana. Dave Smith, the executive director, is on the call here with us as well. But certainly much longer conversation than right now, but would be really interested in a conversation about how to expand that network of effort to bring young people into both the construction industry and agriculture. We have been able to use John Deere University as a digital learning academy for Build Montana, using certification courses from the manufacturer that enable kids to do that. And so would love to have some conversations about how that might be able to work with what you're doing. So very exciting.
Absolutely. And Adam, because we're a K-12 initiative here with our charter school, I think we can do guest speakers. We can get kids on field trips. We need to for exposure purposes. At the 7th and 8th grade level, we actually have a pathways class where kids are doing aptitude testing through UScience and getting certifications that we could bring there too. And then I'm sure Jason has.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Let's talk. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I
can also coordinate. We can coordinate with all the Valley schools too. Like, this isn't just about Corvallis. If we can get
right,
and we can get a pretty big margin.
I think that is one of the challenges we're looking at. We've built out, I think, 4 or 5 programs in the large schools around the state, but how do we scale this into something that can be meaningfully delivered at any of the community schools in the state? We'd be very interested in that conversation. Don't want to speak for you, Dave, certainly, but I certainly am interested. So
yeah, and we have room for more curriculum initiatives too. Like, this isn't just the tools that we're using right now are just the beginning. If there's ways that we can attach curriculum into our charter school that allows kids access to certifications that make them more job ready, like we're kind of that breeding ground for that. Like, we're going to produce kids that are going to come out of Corvallis and hopefully statewide and have all these certifications that when employers are looking for students, we got these ready-made kids with multiple certifications, first aid, OSHA, whatever they may be, and we have that UScience program too. But Adam, if there's more curriculum out there that I'm not aware of that the state has or this group has that we can implement into our charter school, like, we've got room for that too.
Yeah, great.
One more question, if that's all right.
If I could jump in, Sarah.
Yep.
Jason, you've got your hand up. I'll come back to you, Sarah.
Okay.
Right. Thank you. Jason Yeager, Executive Director of the Montana Photonics and Quantum Alliance. Pete, I just wanted to ask 2 quick questions. Are you familiar with the Accelerate Montana Rapid Development Programs out of U of M?
I am not.
Okay. I think that's a link we want to, or a connection we want to create. And second, are you connected at all with the MasTech Industries campus? that is just outside of Corvallis doing advanced manufacturing for defense.
No, hey, can we stretch this meeting out a couple hours, or can I come back on tomorrow? No, Jason,
So
this is
there's a 40-acre campus being built that is doing defense-related technology for our forward operations, and that's located in the Hamilton or Corvallis area. And Accelerate Montana just launched a rapid 7-week development program that aligns well with the skill sets they're going to need. So I'll reach out, Pete. By the way, I got married in Corvallis Community Church, so somewhat familiar with the area. Married a girl out of the community, so we'll just leave it at that.
Jason, we just bought the old church to help them build their new one. That's a good work. And Jason, yeah, so when we go to build the salute to service pathway, the more curriculum and the more internships and apprenticeships I have, the more time these kids can spend at these internships or multiple internships during the day, the better for me. Because the more partnerships I have and the more curriculum that I have, I can give that to Grand Canyon. And I think this is an important part for this conversation today. The more stuff I have to give to Grand Canyon, the more they can package into a 8-hour, 5-day-a-week curriculum for these kids. So then they can spend time at the police department, time at the fire department, time with the American Legion, time with the Civil Air Patrol, time with all of the armed forces recruiters. And then obviously the things that you just spoke to are the exact things that I need to build curriculum for these kids. So that's wonderful news right there. Thank you.
Sari, I'll give you the last question.
All right. You somewhat already answered it, Pete. As my question was, are you looking to add additional career paths into? I see the list of the career paths that you have, but one of the initiatives of this group is to help reduce the cost of childcare, which really a big part of that is getting more people into the early childhood field. And we're looking at expanding apprenticeships. And I know that Grand Canyon University has a great early childhood program. I own several childcare programs, so I'm curious if you guys are looking to expand in other career paths as well.
Well, Sarah, I would say like even these career paths are kind of there's elasticity in all of them. I would say that program, if we start developing it, would either fall into the business if it's a private daycare system, or if it's a public, it would go into that salute to service, because our salute to service is not only military, police, fire, but teaching. We've already got kids that we're placing right now, and I'll let Jason and Amy say some things here in a second, but we're already placing students into our primary school from the high school as TAs that are part of the charter school. But instead of just being TAs in the classroom like your traditional, they're actually getting mentored by the teachers and doing teacher type stuff, inputting grades, kind of showing them how to grade things. So we're trying to integrate teaching as obviously as a service, type job. We all get into this to help kids. So I would say that would fit probably right now into either one of those two pathways.
And we have 9 kids right now interning at different childcare facilities from Stevensville to Hamilton. Currently right now, high school students.
Perfect. I'm going to reach out because we're going to figure out how to get that on the eastern side of the state as well.
Let's do it.
Well, this was really, really good. I truly appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning, and I think your comment about extending this topic for the rest of the meeting, we easily could cover that time. The innovation's fantastic, and one of the things we're going to talk about, and I know you've got schedules you have to keep track of as well, but coming up probably around 10:15, 10:20 now, we're going to go through a strategic framework update and a lot of things, and this goes to the genius of Jennifer Owen setting this agenda. It dovetails so well with what we're going to talk about, what you're doing, the innovation, and plugging into that strategic plan from a workforce perspective. So by all means, it's an open meeting. You're more than welcome to stay on if you have the time. But thank you again. Really appreciate you taking the time this morning to join us.
Yeah, Paul, I know we're kind of running out of time. Just quickly, if I could have Trustee Lewis speak to, because she is a huge part of this homeschool population and she understands that piece. I don't know if you want to speak to the success really quick.
Yeah, I'll just say the feedback from the homeschool families, they've kind of been left on their own. I mean, the reason why they homeschool is for their own individual reasons. And what this has done is given them a lot more resources and direction. It also is the piece that I like about it, it also makes them accountable. You know, they're accountable to our school, they're accountable to their students. So there's a little bit of follow up to all of that. So we're really producing really well-rounded, great students that families that choose to homeschool. And there's some really great stories already coming out of that with families that are choosing to homeschool and then their pathways, you know, whether it's going into vet tech or doing job shadowing. There's just been a huge positive capture of these homeschool families that we've never been able to capture before, especially in our district. And that's giving those families more direction. And I think that's going to be really healthy for those students coming, whether they're getting their high set or their GED. That's really going to give them a more foundational footing when they go into the workforce or into college, because that's giving them, I'm really interested in that, or I'm not interested in that. And right now in high school, whether it's here face-to-face or in the homeschool distant learning charter, it's giving them a taste of what that might look like for them. And if they're backing away from, let's say, I actually have a student, a parent that's talked to me, they have been, their student has been interning as a vet tech, thinking, oh, that's what I want to go do. Well, they've been in vet tech now for a good part of the year, and they're going, well, I enjoy it. I just don't know if I want it for a career. That's a really great thing, not going into college and then going, I've spent this time doing this when it's really maybe a waste of money for me. And now they're going to start pivoting. Okay, where do I want this to take me? So that is another really key element that I love about what's happening with the pathways.
Jason, anything else?
No, I think, I mean, if there's people that are interested in trying to, I think the biggest thing is trying to just find partnerships with businesses. I know it's a tremendous strain sometimes on them just from a time standpoint to try to onboard some of these high school kids. But I think, you know, to touch on Amy's point, it's really valuable that they get the exposure. And, you know, we try to say unpaid or paid. Obviously, we'd love to see paid internships, but even if it's just an unpaid job shadow where they're sometimes just pushing a broom or running tools, that they get some exposure to the industry or whatever that they're shadowing, and then find out, yeah, this isn't something that I like, or something that this is something that I'm passionate about, want to pursue. So I think it's really important just to have these opportunities. And because we don't have like the big industries in this area, this falls on a lot of the small businesses that obviously don't have the employees. So it's definitely a strain on them to try to figure out this with them.
Yeah,
thank you.
This is great. I love the innovation, and you know, it's you could see Corvallis being one of the larger school districts in the state in theory. I mean, it's a tremendous opportunity. And I think your comment about partnership, this is a great board with a lot of resources. And I think you probably see things flashing in the chat of people that are more than happy to jump in and assist you along the way. So again, thank you very much for joining us. This was truly fantastic.
And do you mind if I use the email addresses that are on the Zoom call just to like make contact with people? Would that be acceptable?
Jennifer, can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, of course. And Pete, I've sent you at least one email connecting you with a member, and I'll do a few more. So you'll have some of those direct introductions as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next
I
on the
just want to
agenda.
say,
Go ahead, Susie.
sorry if I can real quick. I just want to say thank you, Pete, for you and your team's incredible work. You know, we are hoping we can replicate these programs across the state and get more and more of this incredible work that's going to create these actual credentials that the superintendent was talking about across the state to prepare our workforce. And we have a lot to talk about and some exciting proposals from the legislature this week. We were working on implementing math for the trades and a third-year math pathway in high school and some things like that that I look forward to talking to you all about as we work through the meeting or in future meetings. Thank you.
Thanks. Amy, I'll turn it over to you for a discussion on the labor market.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me all right? Great, thank you. I hate to take away from such a nice conversation, but hopefully I can provide some additional context just at this statewide level about what's going on in the Montana labor market to help kind of provide that framework for you all as you move into your strategic update process. So I'll try to keep my remarks relatively brief, just on the note of time, but all of the information that I'm presenting today, most of it can be found at our Labor Day report, which is on our LMI website. And so I can send a link to that report as well if you would like any more information. And of course, feel free to contact me. Email is probably the best there if you have any follow-up questions or anything, if we're running so short on time. But overall, in Montana, really, we have seen a strong labor force growth over the last, really exiting the pandemic and over the last couple of years in particular. Typically, so historically, Montana's labor markets have been, as I'm sure you all are familiar with, very tight, meaning that it's difficult for businesses to find the workers that they need. We have seen some loosening of that tight labor market over the last year or so, slight increases in our unemployment rate, some moderation in employment growth, and really strong labor force growth, which is what we want to see. More people coming in and looking for work. And so that's an encouraging sign, I think, for businesses in particular and for economic growth. Economic growth has been really strong in the state over the last couple of years, particularly exiting the pandemic. We had a record high growth in our overall economy. It's moderated some down to about 3.6, 3.9% over the last couple of years, which is still elevated compared to where we were post-pandemic. So really, we're still chugging along quite nicely. Business formation has hit a record high over the last couple of years, and we're on pace in 2024. We believe that once the numbers are all finalized, we'll also have really strong business formation as well. And all of that growth in the Montana economy has translated to increases in income for Montana households. So we've seen some pretty strong income growth as well, both in terms of proprietor income, business income, and then as a wage income as well. A couple of headwinds that we've been talking about, again, are those tight labor markets. They still, while we've seen some alleviation, we still have more job openings than we have unemployed people. So that condition is still true. We've also been paying close attention to inflation. It's come down quite a bit. That's eaten into a lot of wage gains nationally. Really, this is a national issue that, of course, affects us here in Montana. And we're down to about 2.9% inflation growth over the last year or so in 2024. Down from a high of over 9% in 2022. So it has come down, and the trajectory shows it's kind of leveling out here, but still kind of on that downward trajectory. Overall, in Montana, we have, again, strong labor force, strong employment, and strong population growth, particularly post-pandemic. You can see that's what this chart shows, both the shaded areas, the total population, then we have labor force and employment. The difference between those two being the number of unemployed people. So you can see that that number of unemployed people, really, those two lines are getting quite a bit closer together in 21, 22, 23, and then some widening a little bit in 24, where we've seen some of that tight labor market sort of begin to ease. I apologize, my voice is, of course, gone this morning. So, let's see. So this chart here shows you employment growth, both in Montana and across the U.S. Over the last 5 to 6 years and what we project going forward. So the Department of Labor, as many of you are aware, produces employment projections over a 2-year and 10-year time frame. Right now, we're working on updating these projections through 2034. But right now, we project that Montana's economy will continue to grow, employment will continue to grow at just above 1%. So we saw pretty strong employment growth exiting the pandemic, and then that's moderated a little bit over the last year or two. As we would expect, those tight labor markets do tend to constrict how much employment how many jobs we can add, just because the workers aren't there necessarily. When you break this down by industry, we've seen a lot of our initial employment growth coming in the leisure activities, and some in some of our accommodation and food service. Our tourism industry really came back really strong in 21 and 22, exiting the pandemic as people had all this pent-up demand for travel and for recreation, really engaged in that. And we saw a lot of demand for those services and consequently pretty strong increase in employment. In 2023 and so far here in 2024, what we've seen is that healthcare has been a really strong contributor to employment growth, as well as construction, and then our business services, which is like our professional services, as well as administration, and some of those business support services have really been growing a lot. And in fact, when we look at our business formation data, we see that a lot of those new business starts have been in what we consider professional services. So think of professional accountants, lawyers, engineering firms, any of those, advanced manufacturing, all of that would fall within some of that professional services. And that's been really strong growth. But as I mentioned, tight labor markets are still persisting in the state. This chart here shows the number of job openings in green compared to the number of unemployed individuals in the state. And those, to be considered unemployed, just as a quick aside, you need to be not employed and actively seeking work. So that would exclude individuals who may be at home taking care of family, perhaps because they can't find childcare, like was mentioned earlier, or anybody that's in school or retired would be excluded from this. And you can see right now we have about 2 job openings for every 1 unemployed person, or just under that, which is akin to what it was prior to the pandemic. So back in 2009, when we had the Great Recession, we had more people than looking for jobs than there were job openings. But that dynamic really flipped right around 2014, 2015, where we saw those tight labor markets begin to take hold. And that's been the consistent story in Montana really over the last decade. You can see how much that gap really widened initially right after the pandemic and how it's come down a little bit more to what we were prior to 2020. That's for a couple of reasons. As an economist, we think about demand side and supply side impacts. From the demand side, we've seen just an increase in the demand for workers. That's just a byproduct of strong economic growth. As businesses continue to grow, they're going to need more workers than they did before. But from the supply side, we also have some dynamics that are contributing to these tight labor markets through an aging population and particularly in the pandemic, but still is true today, difficulty with access to childcare, impacting parental workforce participation rates. Overall, our labor force participation rate has been declining over the last 20, 30 years. We've seen sort of a consistent decline in our labor force participation rate, which of course contributes to that tight labor market. Primarily, it's driven by retirees. We've seen a dramatic increase in the number of retirements in the state. We have over 200,000 retirees in Montana, and about 61% of all of those individuals who aren't in the labor force are over the age of 55 and are retired. This shows you by age and by main reason why individuals have chosen not to participate. So again, that light blue bar is retirements. That is a significant portion. We also see among that prime working age population, which is that 25 to 54, that caring for family is a main reason that they're out of the labor force. And in that younger population that we've been talking so much about here this morning, you see school enrollment as the primary reason. Many of these individuals are actually in high school, and then there's a significant portion who are in college as well. But again, those, as you're thinking about these workforce issues, engaging that population that's in school will really help address some of our labor market issues across the state, and why apprenticeship and these CTE programs really can help resolve these issues. So when you talk about labor force and by participation, labor force participation by age, while I said the statewide has seen a declines in labor force participation, when you break it out by age, it's not that, say, young kids are less likely to work than they were 30 years ago. It really is the function that declining labor force participation rate is a function of changing demographics, not necessarily differences in these populations by age, because you can see this labor force participation rate has varied slightly, but particularly over the last 10 years or so, all age categories have seen stable or increasing labor force participation rates. So we really attribute the tight labor markets to these demographic shifts. And this is another way to kind of say the same thing. We've seen increases in the number of retirees. This shows you since the 1990s what's happened to those individuals who are out of the labor force and why. Again, our aging population and the retirements, but also we have over about 35,000 people, Montanans, who aren't in the labor force because they're in school. Again, this is a target population that we've been talking about. And then about 37 that are caring for family. And again, that's where this access to childcare is important. And then in the school age, engaging those individuals in the workforce and doing some of that job shadowing and career planning early can help get those individuals into the workforce and utilize them as quickly as possible. I've already touched on this a little bit, but of course, there's certain ways that we can address these tight labor markets. The one that I wanted to highlight here is in migration. The reason why Montana has been able to continue to grow as rapidly as we have, and why our labor force has been growing like it has been, is because we've had significant immigration post-pandemic, particularly domestic immigration. So right now we rank 8th in the nation for the highest rate of in-migration since 2020. Most of that in-migration occurred immediately post-pandemic, like in 21 or 22. And since then, we've sort of tapered back down to a more normal rate of in-migration. I will say we expect that in-migration to continue. Montana has long been an in-migration state, so we typically see more people move to the state than leave each year. But we've had elevated rates since 2020, and we expect that to continue. This shows you that breakout of where those individuals are moving. Again, more, as we would all expect, more Western concentrated, not as much in the East. But still, we've seen pretty significant in-migration, and that's helped. We know, for example, that these individuals who are migrating in tend to be a little bit younger than our existing population, and they also tend to have higher labor force participation rates. So those two elements combined do help contribute to our tight workforce, our tight labor markets, or help address that. But as I mentioned kind of at the onset, one benefit of these tight labor markets is really rapid wage growth. Particularly in Montana, we've seen really, really rapid wage growth immediately in 2020, but then even as we look and adjusted for inflation, even though we've had record high inflation in 2020 in particular, Montana since 2020 has still seen real wage growth, meaning adjusted for inflation, wages have grown faster than the cost of living on average. Of course, there's pockets where that's not true, but at the onset, we're one of only 2 states in the nation that can say that we've had that rapid of wage growth. It varies by industry, of course. We've seen a lot of that wage growth in some of our lower wage industries, like our leisure activities, accommodation, food service. That just tends to happen when those workers are scarce, that those businesses need to compete on wages in order to attract and retain that workforce. So leisure activities, we've seen some pretty high wage growth, but we've also seen high wage growth in the professional services industry, which we attribute to all those business formations, as well as the advent of remote work really helped increase access to that workforce and help drive some of that wage growth. And that wage growth has also, along with those business formations, really helped drive income growth overall. So Montanans' income ranks 30th among states, which is below average, but higher than it used to be. We're kind of gaining in terms of getting more caught up to the national growth rate and income. And a lot of that, again, has to do with those business formations and the wage growth in particular. This shows you, this is the last thing I'll kind of touch on, is our overall economic growth. I mentioned it at the onset, but really we have had very strong economic growth really in 21, 22, and 23 above the national average. And even in 2020, when we saw those slight declines, in general, Montana's pandemic experience was was shorter lived than the rest of the nation in terms of its effect on employment and gross domestic product. We really did see it rebound quite spectacularly in 21 and beyond. So a lot of that, again, if you look at this by industry, was in those same industries: professional services, leisure activities. We've seen the fastest growth in professional services in the nation here in Montana. We saw some on the flip side of that, some things that were impacting or headwinds, I guess, to overall economic growth were in the mining and utilities, some a little bit in agriculture more recently. We've seen that show up a little bit in 2024, but it's hard to say for sure until those that data is finalized. It's hard to draw too many conclusions there, but we have seen, of course, with some of those closures, the mining closures and other issues related to mining and utilities, that's had an impact on our gross domestic product. But those tourism industries, things like professional services and some of those financial activities have also helped bolster those. Even despite the increases in interest rates, we've still seen pretty strong growth in financial activities, overall production as well. So with that, I'll wrap up just to say that we do still project strong growth, particularly in our labor market. It's good from an economist standpoint to see some of that easing of those tight labor markets, although that's still how I would characterize the state's labor market. Inflation is moderating, and we have seen some strong business growth and innovation. But we will continue, I think, in terms of overall economic growth and employment. It's still really important that we focus on these productivity enhancements, either through capital enhancements or labor, like we're talking about here, making sure that each individual is well matched in the job that they're in and has the resources to invest in their own human capital and continue to produce at a high level of productivity. And then that continued in migration, I think, has some issues that I didn't really address from an economic development standpoint, but from a labor market standpoint, there are some benefits to that moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair. But here is a link to where our publications are located and my contact information as well. I'm happy to stay for questions if you want to, or feel free to go on to that agenda item and contact me at some other time if you would prefer to do it that way. So thank you.
Great.
Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Amy. Are there questions for Amy? Hearing none, thank you again. I love the slide, the labor participation demographic by age. And you hear all the time, and maybe it's been said for generations, those young people. That was really it really shows, stability over time in all those demographic buckets. It's a pretty powerful slide. And your closing comments are an absolute perfect segue to our next topics. So thank you again. Strategic framework update. Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
Let me go ahead and share my screen. We're going to talk a little bit about where we stand in the strategic planning process for SWIB. As I had indicated in your board prep memo, it would be fantastic if we are able to move forward today to adopt this and make a recommendation to the governor. But if that's not where people are feeling like they're at, that is absolutely acceptable as well. So this is what you would have received in your packet. This reflects a continued refinement and ongoing conversation around the strategic framework. There are a couple of issues that I want to draw your attention to today. Some of them are fairly small. One of them is quite large. So the first, want to concentrate your attention right now on the left side of the screen under the 406 Jobs Initiative. There are a couple of places here where we need to, where I would like some feedback in getting some refinement here. So as you can see from our October meeting, we've modified these 4 work pathways a little bit to condense a number of things under the career heading and then add in entrepreneurship. So what we're talking about here is a recognition that we want every Montanan to have a plan for their career and a pathway to achieve it. We identify 4 primary priority pathways: college, career, military, entrepreneurship. So are you heading off into a 2-year, 4-year, or advanced degree program? Are you going right into career, whether that's from K-12, CTE prep, stackable credentials, employer-based training programs such as employer training academies, apprenticeships, formal on-the-job training type experiences, everything that falls under that heading? Are you looking at a military pathway to develop your career skills, or is entrepreneurship on mind? And I think, as we know, people will change these throughout their lives, because we're not just talking about people entering the workforce, we're talking about those who are in the workforce and those who have left it and need a pathway back in. So we know that these are not really tunnels. They are sort of a lattice where people will move and change throughout the course of their career. The question for SWIB to contemplate here, and I'm going to run through all these questions and then we'll come back for discussion, is whether or not we want to modify that military pathway to include military and service. So these are things like volunteerism, AmeriCorps type programs. We certainly see a little bit of feedback from the National Governors Association that they're trying to prioritize some service pathways. It is interesting both for new entrants to the labor force as well as people who are looking to return and might start volunteering as a way to build some career skills and return to the workforce. So one of the topics for conversation today is, do we want to stay firm on a military priority as a pathway to career, or do we want to expand that to sort of military and service? And I think you heard that a little bit in the Corvallis presentation as well. The next thing that I want to call to your attention is these ongoing questions about our 6 high demand sectors. So again, these are not about the relevance of these sectors to Montana's economy. This is, as you heard in Amy's presentation, a recognition of these sectors where there are significantly more projected job openings than there are entrants into that field over a 10-year period. So these are sort of enduring gaps between the jobs that exist and the people who exist to fill them. So 2 questions here for your consideration today. The first is on healthcare. So there is tremendous amount of data to support direct healthcare provider gaps, whether that's nurses, whether that's techs, whatever that is. But in addition, we know there are these statewide priority policy areas, particularly around behavioral health. So if we recategorize this sector to be health careers instead of just healthcare, the direct provision of medical services, we could include under that things that we also know are urgent and a priority: behavioral health, dentistry, even public health to some extent. So first topic of conversation, and Heather is not on with us today, but I've had this conversation with her, and from her perspective, she thinks moving to a more expansive category makes sense. The second is this ongoing conversation over the construction trades category. Again, when we look at the raw data, the number of entrants into construction trades is significantly less than the number of jobs that we have to fill it. However, that is also true across skilled trades. And so there is the opportunity to redefine this category as skilled trades instead of construction trades. But in addition, a number of SWIB members echoed this concern in October and in August as well, that we really aren't reflecting any of our legacy industries in general. So we don't have ag, we don't have mining, we don't have logging. Those are areas where there are gaps between people going into those careers and the jobs available, but it's just not as big as these other areas. However, if we define the sector differently, you could define it as production, construction, and extraction trades. So we can create space for people to feel connected to this framework, depending on how SWIB would like to do it. So my second question for you all is, do we want to modify construction trades to be skilled trades? Do we want to be more specific and say something like production and extraction and construction so that people are seeing their industries in there? Because this is our ongoing tension. We want to create, one of our first goals as SWIB in general is to pull the statewide workforce system together. And so we want a framework here where people see where their workforce initiatives locally, regionally, or even statewide fit together, that this is part of a cohesive plan. But we also have to be strategic. If we don't prioritize some things, we won't accomplish anything. So creating this tension, managing this balance between how do we create a system that everyone plugs into and is unified and rowing in the same direction, versus how do we say, listen, for a period of time, some things are very strategic and important, and other things are happening, they're just not prioritized. That's this ongoing tension that SWIB members really have to wrestle with and help weigh in on. So just to kind of recap, want your feedback on how we define the health sector, and then how we define the trade sector. And then whether or not we expand military to reflect a prioritization of service pathways as well. So those are the three little things that we want to have a conversation about. But the next is whether or not I'm so anxious about bringing this up, but I think it's essential, whether or not we just pivot our framework in its entirety. So we have a Skill Up Montana heading that is employer systems and all of these priorities underneath them. And these are good priorities. I think they're the right priorities. But Skill Up Montana is a framework that is used in many, many other states. There is Skill Up Oklahoma, Skill Up Connecticut. Multiple states have adopted this particular language. So I spent a little time between our last meeting and this meeting playing with a rebrand that does not change any of the content, but simply presents it in a different way. What I'm going to show you now is the concept of a strategic framework for our state workforce system that is titled 406 Jobs. So we're going to use what you see on the left-hand side of the screen and take everything that encompasses the hire and scale initiatives and embed them underneath it. So I'm going to share a different screen and show you all what that might look like. And again, my goal here is not to sort of get us confused or overwhelmed. I want to create something that is uniquely Montanan and uniquely ours, so that we can brand this and share this, give this to the governor in a way that is unique to our own state. So let me grab this PowerPoint presentation right here, and I will run you through what this might look like. And again, I'm just going to highlight some of these same issues that we need to be wrestling with as we head in here. So this is what we would call 406 Jobs, Montana's workforce strategy. And you can see all the exact same content here. Under zero barriers to employment, that's where we've grabbed this idea of employer system. So this is all the content from the slide that I just showed you. Treat it as what it truly is. These are barriers to employment. Whether it's the way that employees get their skills and supports to enter and be successful in the workforce system, or whether it is employers who don't know how to engage with the system, who cannot, as a sector, get the employees they need, or whether it's the system not being coordinated, not being collaborative, not being adequately resourced. All of these things are barriers to growing our labor market at the rates that Montana's economy and Montana's businesses need us to grow at. And then we'll revisit again these conversations over the 6 high demand industries. One of the things that I want you to kind of contemplate as we go through this is thinking about each of these 4 pathways to work, 0 barriers to employment, and 6 industries as sort of a embedded set of placemaking, for lack of a better word. 4 pathways to work is really where we bring the whole state workforce system together, where we create space for everybody's local, regional, and statewide initiatives to fit together. The barriers to employment become our strategic priorities. What are the things in all of these areas that we're really going to work on over the next 1, 2, 3, or 4 years to move the needle on? And then the 6 high demand industries can be where we embed the local work. What if we're going to address occupational needs, occupational shortages? That's a local initiative because it's local businesses coming together with local education and training providers to move the needle, recruit people, retain people, attract businesses. So I want you to think about that as we go through this. All of this content should seem real familiar, except for what I have in front of you here. Because one of SWIB's primary goals in developing a statewide strategic framework is identifying what the goals and metrics are going to be. What are the priorities that we want everybody working on together? So I have thrown out 4 large overarching goals just as something for you to think about, that when the governor talks about it, when all of us talk about it, when each of our workforce partners talk about it, these are the directions in which we could potentially row. So we've talked a lot about the general purpose of this strategic framework is that every Montanan has a pathway to a career and a plan to achieve it. That's the unifying tagline that brings us all together. And then here are some very tangible goals that we could try to achieve. Increase the labor force by 50,000 persons by 2029. We, in Governor Gianforte's first term, that number was about 41,000. So this is a stretch goal, but it is, it's about a 20% increase over the course of 4 years. Reduce barriers to employment. Our tremendous data and economics team is holding a out of the workforce report that shows the number of Montanans that have just left the workforce altogether. Some of them can come back, and we need to create bridges for them to do that. And then one of the great success stories in Montana is that we've had year over year real wage growth above and beyond inflation. And maybe one of our goals is that we sustain that over a period of time. So again, I'm not presenting these to you as goals. I am seeding them to you as something that SWIB needs to think about in creating the reason why this strategic framework exists. So let's talk about these 4 pathways to work. Again, I want to suggest to you that this is the place where we unify the system together, where we tell everybody, find your place and see how we work together. So these are kind of all of the things that we do to help people enter the workforce, stay in the workforce, or return to the workforce. And these are all opportunities for us to grow the robustness of the state workforce system across targeted areas. And again, recognizing that none of these are static pathways, but really a lattice work of how people will change and evolve and grow over their careers. So there may be things that we're missing here in terms of strategies for getting people into the workforce or supporting them once they're in there. But these are things that we've identified as potential areas for SWIB to talk about, discuss, and debate. And then again, on the right, if SWIB chooses to expand that to military and service, we'd modify that a little bit. But I think it's important that we think about military both incoming and outgoing. Yes, we want to support veterans transitioning to civilian work, but we also want to encourage people to think about entering the military as a career pathway. So then again, let me focus your attention here on the 0 barriers to employment. And this is where we capture employees, employer, system. Those are the 3 pillars of our workforce system. And we want to have some strategic priorities in each of those areas. So this slide in front of you now is essentially the slide that we were looking at the start of this presentation. These are all of the kind of high priority issue areas that are functionally barriers to employment. And the challenge for SWIB today is to decide if these are the right barriers, period. And then over time, we'll talk about which ones we want to prioritize on an annual or on a 2-year basis to really say to the state, partners, these are where we want you to come alongside and work together to try to bring some of these down. These might be areas where we recommend specific initiatives to the governor or to our state agency partners. This might be places where employers come in and say, we're going to come together and work on this for a statewide initiative. These are absolutely areas where we want to see state agencies working better to do planning, to do coordination, to do the data sharing, and good news storytelling that the governor asked us to do when he presented to us in August. So this is really the heart and the meat of what we started our conversation with today, just repackaged and rebranded under this unique to Montana 406 jobs framework. And then lastly, we'll return to this ongoing conversation of the 6 high demand industries. And from my perspective, we need SWIB to weigh in here, SWIB members to weigh in and make sure that we've defined these in a way that makes sense. But once we've done this, I think what I would encourage us to think about is that this being the way that we encourage our local and regional partners to own a piece of the labor market trends. So ultimately, in my world, I would love to see a proliferation of sectoral-based or occupational-based partnerships at the local level around the state, doing very specific local initiatives in these careers. So this is going to look like EDAs and chambers and employers and workers and 2-year colleges and 4-year colleges and the K-12 system coming together to say, in our community, the data shows that we have very serious teacher gaps or a very huge opportunity in Tech Hub to build advanced manufacturing and computing jobs. And so we locally are going to work on this and coordinate it up into the statewide system. And the US Department of Labor has provided us a framework for this in their updated sector framework strategies. So sector frameworks and sector partnerships are not new. Montana has done them before. They've had some successes and some real struggles. It seems that localized efforts work better. The healthcare sector did this in 2017-ish, I think. Joe Teal can correct me if I'm wrong. But where it worked, it's because it was locally driven and locally based. So we have an updated framework that we can provide to our local and regional partners and say, listen, the state has said these are the areas where we need you to really concentrate your attention. Can you get your local employers, your local workers, your local training providers together and develop some localized goals that move the needle here, whether that's K-12 career pathways, private training opportunities, apprenticeships, whatever it is. Let's try to address this in your community in a very strategic way that feeds into the overall statewide framework and the overall statewide metrics. So in practice, this is what we look like we're doing here for SWIB. We are encouraging the locals, encouraging regional partners, encouraging industry sectors to say, let's build some partnerships to do some very localized targeted work. We're going to support you with some intermediaries who are facilitating this work and connecting it to the broader system. But we're going to keep the sector-based work at the local level, because trying to create an initiative to train people into the trades at the statewide level is too big. It's too broad, and we won't be able to sustain engagement. But what we can do at the statewide level is look at areas that SWIB can recommend into the governor and into the state agencies, into the workforce system generally, saying these are the cross-cutting things that impact us statewide, whether that is creating credential registries, a database that validates and tells people whether they're in K-12 or adult education or returning to the workforce. Listen, these are credentials that employers in Montana recognize and they have real value. That cuts across sectors, that cuts across the whole state. That could be a statewide priority. The same is true. We talked a lot in SWIB about a reentry initiative. How do we address the fact that Montana has very high rates of recidivism, relatively low success in community corrections, and a huge gap of people who can't come into the workforce because their criminal justice background, their nonviolent criminal justice background is a barrier to employment. That goes across sectors. That is a statewide level challenge. And the same is true with veteran transition. The same is true with folks who have disabilities and need accommodation in the workforce. There are cross-cutting initiatives that I would recommend SWIB think about as the statewide priorities and let the occupational specific career pathway work happen at local or regional levels where you have much more precise local market data and much more hands-on employer engagement. I think as we roll this out, if we're able to move forward today, recommend to the governor accepts the recommendation, we want to be engaging our stakeholders. We want to be presenting this to the Board of Regents, to META, to Chamber of Commerce's, to superintendents all across the system, to employer groups, industry groups. We want to share this and welcome them into being a part of this framework. But then the hardest work, I think, of SWIB is to establish those big overarching goals and those system-wide metrics. So what are we going to measure our success against? I've tossed a few up here on the screen that I know are important to the governor, but we're going to need to spend some time saying on an overarching 3 or 4 year basis, we want to move the needle broadly in terms of this many people into the workforce or this percentage impact. But there's going to be these metrics that are very tangible and concrete. And what will those be? And you see a few that I've thrown up here on the screen. And then, of course, we at the SWIB level will want to do some work plans. But keep in mind, the role of SWIB is predominantly to coordinate, facilitate, and communicate. We are here to make recommendations to our workforce partners and give people a place to come together and work. SWIB is not a direct service provider. We have agencies and industries and workforce partners who do that. But the role of this board is to say, we're recommending, and the governor hopefully is adopting the following priorities, the following work plans, and we're inviting you all to come be a part of that. So in a very practical, how does this play out sense? That's a little bit of what we're looking at here. So I'm just going to pop this back on the screen so to give you one last look. Again, we can stay with the Skill Up Montana framework that you saw on the screen before. That is fine. And if that is what the board wants to recommend to the governor, many cabinet agencies have seen that already, and there's excitement about it. So if we want to stay with the Skill Up framework, that's absolutely fine. My suggestion, my recommendation to you all today is that we contemplate what you see on the screen in front of you as something that is uniquely Montana, accomplishes the exact same content, but brands it in a way that is uniquely ours rather than replicating what other states are doing. So I've thrown a lot at you. I think we have a few minutes, Mr. Chair, for some general discussion. And then I'd love to send you all, if you're not ready to vote today, we could do some committee discussion and come back. But I think we have a few minutes on our agenda to talk through the issues I've raised. Just as a reminder, do we want to add service? How do we want to define our sectors? And are we comfortable with this type of rebrand? And then this underlying question of, are we hitting the right balance in terms of being broad enough to unify a system, but strategic enough to still accomplish some defined goals and hit some metrics? So those are what I'm hoping SWIB members will discuss. Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
No, that's great, Jennifer. Thank you. So I just to clarify, in the to maybe preserve the option best in terms of the action item, could we move that action item until after the committee's visit, just so that people can wrap their head around this and maybe be more prepared, should they be comfortable with a motion to discuss?
Yeah, you just need to make a motion to amend the agenda, Mr. Chair.
Okay. At this point, I would like to I would like to request a motion to amend the agenda to move the action item to, I'm going to be specific here, until the board discussion following the committee work, to allow to fully vet this topic and better be able to react to an approval motion. Do we have a motion?
I move that we do that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Patty. Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay. And moved and seconded to move the action item to approve the strategic framework until the board discussion portion of the agenda. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this is Senator Nolan, and I'm going to have to get off at noon because I got to
Okay.
go to session. But I had a question, since we're in discussion, if I could ask Jennifer, what did regarding this matter, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
So I was just wondering what the colleges have, when we're communicating with them, how do they foresee what we're trying to do? I mean, I had a good relationship with our college up here in the Flathead. I just wonder what other presidents or whoever's assigned to address us, what are they feeling what do they want from us? I mean, are we giving them the right input or enough input and then letting them get back to us?
I think that's a wonderful question. This has not been presented in any significant detail external to SWIB. Obviously, it's a public meeting; anybody could watch. I am optimistic that we are generally in alignment, but I would note, we have Joe here who can maybe answer that question better than I could.
Refer to Joe.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Representative. We've shared this framework and concept with the two-year deans and CEOs. I'll say anything that I think brings some focus for them in terms of focus sectors that SWIB would encourage them to work on pathways around, that improves data collection and alignment with WIOA funding opportunities so that they have clearer routes to funding for students in those pathways, is welcome. So I think this is a solid framework from colleges' perspectives. Many of the initiatives that are included in the framework are items that the university system, the two-year college system are pretty actively working on. But as we kind of get into the next stage of work, I'm sure that they'll have lots of suggestions, excitement, and enthusiasm to to work with you all in advancing this agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay. Hearing none, those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Okay, great. Well, motion passes. We'll take that up during board discussion. At this point, do we have time to take a small break, Jennifer? We'll stay on track and then come back and discuss these topics that Jennifer raised and questions in the individual committees.
Yeah, it might be easier if we'd like to just take our break a few minutes early, maybe be back in 10 minutes. And then I will toss you all into breakout rooms and you can discuss some of these questions and then we can come back and have a committee discussion and hopefully a vote.
Yeah, sounds great. And we'll do our best to stay on time for the rest of the meeting because, as Senator Nolan said, he's got to go. Heather O'Hara's at the Capitol also.
Mr. Chair,
tied up on bills.
before we break, I just want to make sure we don't lose anybody over the break. So if there are maybe any quick questions for clarification that people have, I would hate to lose someone. I hope everybody comes back after the break, but I just want to make sure there aren't any things that weren't clear in my presentation that people wanted to ask.
Very good. Any questions? Okay. See a lot of heads shaking no. We'll take 10 minutes and be back here to resume discussion on the strategic framework.
At 10:50.
Thank you. Put a time on it. 10 minutes could be it's not specific enough. Very good. 10:50. Thank you. It's 10:50. In the packet that Jennifer sent out in advance, there is the board prep material memo that does list out those questions that she mentioned in her presentation. Maybe if you want to call that up as you have your discussions, it might help guide that. Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you if you want to. Any other comments before we send people to their respective breakout rooms? Oh,
We're going to send you into 3 breakout rooms that generally follow the committee structures, but not quite because we don't quite have enough people to do all 4 of our committees. So we'll put you generally into kind of a blended committee. And so what I would ask, Sarah Schreiner, I'm going to ask you to facilitate the conversation in one breakout room. Jason Yeager, I'm going to ask you to facilitate it in another room. Dylan, do you still have Commissioner Swanson with you? I'm not sure we have either of them on here. So we're gonna put the rest of you into a small room. Joe Teal, maybe since I know I have you on, I'll ask you to facilitate that 3rd room. And then Mr. Chair, I think you indicated you want to kind of pop in and out of the rooms. So again, what we'd like you to talk in these discussion groups is very generally, what is your reaction to the idea of rebranding this to something that's a little bit more unique to Montana? Would ask you to discuss this question about service as an additional pathway to career or as a modified pathway to career, and then spend some time talking through these sectors and how we capture them. If you have time before we pull you back out, I would ask you to think a little bit about goals and metrics, but really we asked this on Tuesday in executive committee. It was in your memo. Please have some discussion about the year going forward. We're going to spend a lot of time on the strategic framework, but we don't need to only spend time on the strategic framework. So what are some other issues, priorities, things that you all would like to see on future agendas? If you could dedicate a little time to that as well. And then I think, Mr. Chairman, according to your schedule, we'll come back here maybe at 11:20, do about 30 minutes in the breakout room, come back at 11:20, and then we will ask for some group discussion and hopefully a vote.
perfect.
Okay, I'm going to open those breakout rooms now and send you in. And I had dropped this in the chat, but if there are members of the public on, there are still members of the public on who would like to go into one of those breakout rooms. and just observe those conversations, please let me know and I will pop you into any one of those rooms. So if you'll hang on, please, you should shortly see an indication that you can head into your breakout room, and we will bring you out again at 11:20. So again, you should see on your screen the chance to join a breakout room. If you could just click on that and go ahead and join, that would be great. And then for those of you who are if those of you who are members of the public who are listening, if you'd like to jump into a room, we would just let me know and we will drop you into one of those rooms.
Jennifer, if you'd like me to be available for any of those conversations, feel free to put me somewhere, but I can also unbury from my email too.
Oh, up to you, Crystal, whatever you'd like to do.
Okay, I'll just work here for a bit then.
Okay, great. Paul, where would you like to go?
It matters not. My one question I'll ask before we go is I noticed it did thin out a little bit during the break. And my concern would be, do we have a quorum for any action when we come back?
We will if we're close. We're real close. So
Okay.
I had
Sorry,
a
go ahead.
message. I had a message that Commissioner Swanson and Dylan were together. Assuming that they are both on and active, we will have a quorum.
Okay. I saw names disappear that were on before and it worried me a little bit. So
No, and I think Adam said he would try to be back in about a half an hour. So assuming that he's back,
Okay.
then that would help us get to quorum as well.
Okay. Super.
Okay, so I'm gonna just send you to a room, and then you can click on your own screen to leave a room if you'd like, and then I can
Okay.
put you somewhere else.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, you should see that now, Paul, to go. Okay.
Hi.
And we are all back. At least Zoom gives you a countdown clock. Teams is just poof, you're gone. So that was kind of nice. But the great discussion, the discussion that I got to be part of. I get at this point, do we want would it be productive? We've got 20 minutes. We want to save time for the action item that we moved on the agenda to the end to contemplate. But maybe if there's a spokesperson in the group that you could kind of walk through what the consensus was on the questions that Jennifer had, and could we start, Jason, with you? You were kind of ramrodding that room. Oh, here. Sorry, Jason, I didn't see your chair was empty. Do you mind if you just want to recap sort of the consensus of your group? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. On the service side, we were unanimous in adding this with the caveat that the service has some type of time horizon that is focused on gaining marketable, transferable skills, which somebody pointed out is now the norm for military service. So the other service organizations that we would be looking at, we want to see the same thing, that the young people coming through, the people coming through have something they can put on a resume, whether that be soft skills, networking, so on and so forth. On the rebranding, 100% behind 406 jobs. That went smooth. Everyone liked that concept. The sectors, we were conflicted on whether adding behavior to healthcare and careers was too specific and therefore exclusive of other areas in that, or whether or not it needed to be added. So on both sides. And then wrap that up with goals and metrics. The chamber did a employer and workforce needs assessment, a survey in 2019, 2022. Across the board, we said having data like that would be advantageous. It's been 3 years. Maybe it's time to refresh that. We had a couple comments about focus groups or working groups around each one of these 6 high demand industries. We've talked about that a couple times. I think Heather looked at this if she's still on the call for healthcare. We think that's a great idea, both from the standpoint of hearing the voice of industry, but at the same time, if we have an idea and we want to go use them as a sounding board rather than just trying it, let's run it by them, get their input in the beginning before we look at execution. All right. Anything, Tony, Mark, Paul, Matt, that you would add?
Okay.
All right. That's our group.
Great. Thank you. Both, Sarah? I'm not sure which one of you
I
would like
took
to.
notes, so I'll go
Awesome.
down. The rebrand, we are all 100% backing that. We think it's a lot more clear and a better representation of the state. When we were looking at the military and adding service to that, one of the recommendations was framing it as public service rather than just service, so that there was a little bit more clarity. There was some confusion under the, if we call it health careers, would that also include like the IT person that works in a healthcare facility, or, you know, what actually would fall under that? So we would like more clarification, but we were unanimously in favor of the more inclusive term, just wanting to make sure that everybody understands what that all encompasses. One of the things that was brought up was advanced manufacturing and computing services, changing computing services to high tech so that there was, again, more clarity and less ambiguity. Excuse me. They just said computing doesn't necessarily resonate with everyone. Construction trade as a whole, they were more in favor of keeping construction versus adding skilled trade. The reason being was not every construction trade is a skilled trade and vice versa. And then overall, we had a pretty lengthy discussion about the need to somehow include the legacy fields and legacy industries in this, whether we keep these 6 up and rising, but have a notation about let's also make sure that we are still investing in our legacy industries. Some potential titles for that was ag, food, and natural resources. We felt like that covered a good majority of those. For metrics, the main thing was we wanted it to be simple, keeping it at 3 to 5 metrics that we are measuring, so it's not too complicated, and also making sure that we understand the metrics, because there was some confusion when it came down to percentages. What does that actually mean? For goals for the upcoming year, Patty suggested that the incumbent worker program, is there any way that SWIB could have a role in that, in seeing where those grant funds are going and helping view those applications? And then Paul suggested just hearing more innovative programs such as the Corvallis model that we heard, and continuing to use the SWIB board as really a vehicle and a vessel to get those ideas out to the other parts of the state. So anything else that I'm missing, gentlemen?
Sounds good. Thank you, Sarah. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to the other group. It took me too long to figure out how to leave the first room. I didn't know where the button was, so I didn't make it. But I'm not sure who is taking lead on that group, but I'll ask if you could give a recap.
I had asked Joe to take notes, but I don't know if he did or if he heard that or if somebody else in that room facilitated that conversation.
Jennifer,
Katie,
apologies, I got pulled away.
yeah, I don't know if Katie or Shanda wants to jump in. They were kind of leading that one.
I can try to cover it. I wasn't taking notes though. So we like the framework and the branding in regards to the service ideas and concepts. We all were supportive of that. When we came to the high demand sectors and the more inclusive language, the healthcare versus health careers, we liked that. We thought that would translate well to the tribal communities too, and all the work that they're up to. In regards to construction trades versus skilled trades versus production, extraction, and construction, we spent a bit of time there, wondering where like CL and these types of things would land, and is that encompassed in skilled trades? So I think we landed that maybe a better definition of what skilled trades could be, and is. Commissioner Swanson shared with us the current thought process right now, and so maybe defining that so we could make sure what that is and make sure those things that we are assuming could fit in there are. So whether assuming credentials and licensures and these types of things are required, but felt that could go sideways without more prescription around it. We didn't get to metrics. What am I missing for people that were in that discussion? Because I was not taking notes. I'm just going off of recollection.
Yeah, we did jump in quite a bit to that conversation about skilling or credentialing. What is a high demand or high skill job? And we really focused on kind of discussing that it's a skill that leads to either occupational licensure, like a plumber or an electrician, or some industry recognized credential of value, whether that comes through a sprint degree program or a 2-year program or on the job training or registered apprenticeship. It's really about that credential of value. The example I gave was like boiler makers, right? They're high pressure welders, highly trained, but they don't have an occupational license. They still do have a pretty significant skill or credential recognized by the industry. I think there probably is some value in this group putting forth some recommended definitions so we can unite the system in an understanding of what is a high skilled trade, right? I see Jim at the corner of my screen here. Ironwork is certainly a high skilled trade, doesn't necessarily have an occupational license, but it's high skill.
Correct. And Sarah, just what you said, they're all the credentials that go on to that, talking about welding, things like that, rigging, doing high picks, way up in the air, things like that. At the end of the day, though, we're not considered skilled trade, but we do have the credentials with that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess at this point, Jennifer, I think we got some good feedback on a number of the questions. It seems like a resounding consensus that the branding of 406 jobs is very much in favor. I don't know. I guess let's open up for other discussion before the next step. If anybody has any other thoughts on the framework. And the other topic that was on the table, just so we don't lose it, was what you as a board would like to see in future meetings.
Thanks, Paul. I would like to share that I heard Sarah's recommendation that it is really intriguing to me of having SWIB more involved in the deployment of incumbent worker training funds. That would require a statutory change. So time is short for something like that, but we're happy to have more conversations. I'll visit with Jennifer offline about what that might entail. But given that we're already 10% through this legislative session, I don't know that we have time, but that would require a statute change.
The other thing in that, as part of that discussion, um, Patty and Sarah, you kind of were driving that, and Bo made some great comments about it. Those that are aware of it, it's a really great thing, and those that aren't aware of it, there's you're missing out because it's a great program. Is that something that we might just have on the agenda of a future meeting to talk about, to learn more and share
Yeah.
the merits of that program?
Yeah, I think we can definitely prepare to do a briefing. SWIB members may have policy recommendations that aren't really about how funds are deployed per se, but are more about how the program operates. And then we can sort of go from there. But I don't know that we need to try to expedite some sort of legislative discussion.
Other thoughts that anybody has on the framework or other ideas?
Want to tell Jennifer thank you for all of the intention that was put into this because it's very clear that we could have simply stayed with the original, but this is a significant improvement moving forward. So bravo.
Well said, Sarah.
Thank you. I mean, I think we're having really great discussions both at SWIB and one-on-one that are driving this. But if the board would like to vote today to recommend this to the governor, we do need to resolve a couple of these questions around the sectors. Or, I mean, if you want to make a lesser recommendation, or I mean, the board can do what it likes, but you can decide you're not ready to make a recommendation. We can start making some changes to categories. We can do what you like, but I do need some clear direction.
I do have one suggestion off topic from the questions on the prepared employees piece. The overcoming illness and disability is a bit outdated language in thought process, so I'm wondering if we could change that to disability empowerment.
Yep.
Overcoming isn't quite what we do anymore, so thank you.
So I think we had the two. Maybe we can take a stab at trying to, if we can get some resolution on a couple items. The healthcare question on right now it reads healthcare/health careers.
I would like us to pick one.
Is there a thought on where the group would like to go with that to resolve it?
I think it sounded like health careers was the more inclusive and the one that pretty much everyone agreed on. Correct me if I'm wrong?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, is it consensus of the group, health careers? Okay. I'm trying to find my sheet, sorry. Construction trades versus skilled trades versus production extraction, that might be a tougher one. Are there thoughts from the group on what would be a better fit there?
I think the union guys have the best information.
I would like to stick with construction trades.
What was that again? Sorry, I stepped in on you, Jim.
Over construction trades, skilled trades, and then I think we just leave it at construction trades. Leads a broader variety instead of being skilled trades. I think it's just construction trades.
As per our discussion in our small group, I agree with that.
Further discussion on that one? Anybody have thoughts? Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Patty.
Yeah, we had a suggestion to change the word computing services to high tech.
Okay. And I'm trying to get that back on my screen.
Jennifer,
Okay.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on including these legacy industries somewhere in there? Because is the focus simply on the up and coming industries, or is there a way that we can honor these legacy industries that are already playing such a significant role in our economy?
Yeah, it's a great question. So all of these sectors here are, and I think you see a little bit of conversation from Katie in the chat as well. All of these sectoral definitions are a little bit of an art because they turn on exactly what I think some of the folks have discussed, which is what are the specific occupations under these headings. And so there are ways to combine occupations that get us to just about anything. But again, what we're trying to do here is data driven. So we're trying to grab those where there's the biggest number of gaps between occupations and people entering. So, for example, when we talk about hospitality and recreation, that would include all of your food prep, service, all those sorts of things. They expect about 11,000 annual openings, and about like 4,000 or something people entering it. So there's like a 6,000 job gap there. There is a set of occupations that would fall under the heading. The way the labor market folks do it is farming, fishing, and forestry. That's looking at something more like a few hundred gaps in jobs between, in job growth versus people in the sector. So we absolutely could add something like farming, fishing, and forestry. We could define a broader occupation that included maybe extraction careers like mining. Um, there are ways to create a sector if you wanted to add a seventh, or if we wanted to have a separate initiative somewhere that reflects that we want to preserve Montana's heritage while still acknowledging that there are places where there are real employment gaps. The other thing that I would note that we haven't discussed today, because I think the executive committee's recommendation was it probably didn't need to be discussed, but just want to put on your radar screens that in addition to protecting our old industries, we haven't thought at all about new industries. We have high tech in there, but in terms of places where there are industries that are just in their fledgling stage, they don't show any job gaps because they mostly don't exist. So we also aren't projecting any jobs. So we have these two kind of life cycle ends where we need to think about the industries that have powered Montana's economy and how we preserve their role going forward. We need to think about what's new and emerging, but the urgency is in the middle where we have a handful of sectors with massive gaps between entrants and job openings. And so I would just offer that as some data for SWIB members to consider. If you wanted to add a seventh sector that was farming, fishing, and forestry, or production and extraction, there are absolutely ways to show that there is gaps between what is needed. They're just not as large as the 6 that are on the screen already.
If I could maybe throw something out, that when I thought of that same thing, Sarah, how do you Jennifer said something in the presentation that really resonated with me, and that's the influence of the local areas, and that local areas need to own this and start thinking as a community around what their needs are. And what I really like about this is this creates that framework, but it gives the local, these high demand, and they're data driven. What is a high demand job in Bozeman might be very different than, say, Culbertson, Montana, way up on the High Line. So it's up to Culbertson to say, we need diesel mechanics, frankly, to work for Adams Business or C&D. That allows them a framework to then plug into that traditional industry. So we've kind of got the bridge built, if you will, without maybe having to list out more or dilute out the 6, which are very data driven, if that helps.
And I think
I'd
as
like
a
to-
board,
oh,
go ahead.
Sorry, it's Adam. I'd like to add, I guess one of my concerns, we've got a very data-driven focus on the 6. They align nicely with the governor's strategy. My worry about adding more is what defines the criteria of where we stop. And there are lots of other roles and careers and industries that are important, but how do we get to a place of, okay, the 6 makes sense because the data supports it and the governor's strategy supports it. But if we're going to add to that, then why and how are we adding?
That's exactly what I was going to say, Adam. I think that, as a board, we have an obligation to look at the data and let's not overcomplicate this. At some point, I would imagine there can be amendments to the program, there can be special initiatives that happen within it, but this is a really good starting point.
Our group talked about this extensively because we didn't I think land the plane anywhere on where we were as a group. It felt like it was like if you don't include those, there's some large taxpayers in there, like we talked about. Okay, that Stillwater laid off how many people, but I would look at their tax bill, and I'm sure it's pretty substantial to what they contribute to this state. And you don't want people in ag, people in mining and extraction, people in logging to feel like, well, we're not included in the 406 jobs plan, or we don't have a spot in here. You put the nail in the coffin of our industry as someone who contributes a lot to our state still. And so that was I kind of agreed with Adam that hey, it doesn't maybe fit in the six emerging, we don't have to add a seventh one necessarily. But I also am how do we shoehorn maybe what Jennifer said, there's a bunch of jobs that don't even exist right now that we also need to factor into this. And we also need to pay homage to our heritage and the legacy industries that have kind of built this state. Is there a way to add a pillar to this 406 jobs initiative that talk about the looking into the future and also respecting our past? I don't know. This is a hard one, I think.
I think that's where potentially, Bo, if I was in Stillwater County, or some of the surrounding counties, and I was looking at it from a local perspective, I'd be laser focused on mining, extraction. And for the future jobs, if that's going to be in kind of Jason's world, in photonics driven, some of the tech stuff, things that are just emerging, that would be kind of more of a Bozeman local area focus. I think it feels like we've got the flexibility, and the six that are on there, there's no doubt that's going to change if the tech hub gets off and running. And they're talking 50,000 jobs just within the tech hub, let alone the goal of 50 in the state. That's probably going to make this in a different way in a couple of years as we pivot the plan. I don't know if that helps, but any other thoughts, questions, concerns? Did we address all the questions, Jennifer? I was going from my notes.
Let me
Our group also suggested public service versus just service. Sorry, we had a lot of suggestions.
Good point. No, that was a good one, Bo. I was part of that discussion.
Okay, so then what you see on the screen is what I have heard from you all today. And then in addition, captured Shanda's request that we have disability empowerment as the more modern language to address folks who need and deserve accommodation in the workplace. So have I incorporated here the scope of the discussion? I think this conversation about protecting and preserving our legacy industries is really an important one, and one that if the board votes to make this recommendation to the governor, I think we would certainly reflect in our presentation to him that this is an area of real uncertainty. I think Patty has rightfully said that things like value-added agriculture and some of the technology that we see in natural resource sectors, including tech hub technology, how we're using drones to map and protect resources, to do wildfire prevention that preserves our logging industry. There are absolutely ways that our historic sectors are factored in here, and we're thinking about what's next in each of those industries. But it is hard for me, and it's why I've raised it, to see a focus on sectors that doesn't include the ones that have powered Montana's economy for a long time. So I think this is a rich and right discussion to have, one that if the board recommends, we would raise to the governor. And then I think each of the sectors will need occupational definition, and I think we should look for ways to ensure that where appropriate and where it's logical, we try to reflect those historic industries as well.
I'm supportive of that. Having tried to navigate and lift up some of the ag side, we need the partners in the industry to come to the table in order to make that a reality. And I'd certainly be standing there ready to welcome them. And I've been trying to get them involved. So I think that's an important component of this effort too.
So we're almost at time. I guess I'll ask the question if the board is comfortable making a motion um, to put the proposed strategic framework as amended on the table for approval, or
I move that we proceed forward with it as presented by Jennifer.
I second.
great. Thanks, Patty and Sarah. That was quick. Um, any further discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none. Those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Great. Motion passes, and again, a huge thank you to Jennifer for all the work that she's done, and thanks to all of you for the great discussion to get this. I'm really excited that this is going to get turned over to the governor for his review and consideration. That brings us up to really closing remarks. I just have to say this was really a fantastic meeting. I really the innovativeness of the Corvallis presentation, it fed in so well to Amy's labor report, and then right into this strategic framework. So great meeting, Jennifer. Great agenda. Thank you all. Really, I kind of have an educational background growing up in that world, and the innovation that's happening in public schools, it is amazing. So kudos to Corvallis as a model for the whole state. The last but not least, I will again ask for public comment should we have any. Okay, hearing none. Any other thoughts from the board for the good of the order?
Yeah, Paul, I have something to share. I'm down in Orlando at the Associated Equipment Distributors annual summit, and so it's all the equipment dealers in agriculture and construction across the United States. 2 years ago, they launched a project called Vision 2025, which was designed to put 10,000 additional service technicians into the world. Partnering with high schools on accrediting high school programs, first in safety and then kind of as a feeder program into tech schools, and then accrediting tech schools and tracking the students that go through that pathway to come into the industry. In that process, they'd set a goal initially of raising $5 million from the industry to fund this effort. A year ago, they announced they'd hit the 5 million, and they increased it to 7.5 million over the course as they wanted to expand the process. Last year at this event, they announced they hit the 7 million or 7.5 million, and they moved it to 10 million because of the industry interest and support they were seeing. They have shared today that they're at 8.2 million on that pledge to get to 10. Interestingly, they shared with us the goal originally was 94 accredited colleges, 102 accredited high schools, 120 accredited colleges, 200 accredited high schools, driving 5,000 certified technicians and a workforce entry of 10,000 across the country. Currently, we're at 94 accredited colleges, 102 recognized high schools, so about 78% and 51% of the goal by 2027. And interestingly, they've certified 4,400 service technicians through college, and 5,600 have entered the workforce through the program. So they're at about 56% of the goal through 2027. But a really interesting, focused industry effort around the country to kind of raise up this trades effort. And in Montana, certainly been active in that process. There are some significant dealers that have been involved in this. Modern equipment out of Missoula, obviously RDO Equipment Company, and the John Deere dealers across the state. So just thought I'd share that. Really encouraging news about industry investment and what it can mean to help young people find careers in the trades.
No, that's great, Adam. Thanks for sharing that. Any other thoughts or comments from the group? Okay, well, again, thank you very much for joining this morning, and I'm going to adjourn the meeting and